So once again, we're referencing this bar chart to look at how are we going to develop the cost for the product, labor, materials, and overhead. So this first part we're going to look at is the labor costs associated with it. And there's two parts of it. How long does it take, the minutes per part or the hours per part, how long does it take to do that? And then how much do the employees make in that process? So how much do you pay an employee per hour plus other costs associated with the employee? So we're going to look at this in a little more detail. So for each step, you need to develop the time it takes, each step in the process of making the part. There's a video on, a review video for you on stopwatch time studies. This will be pretty much what you learned in IME 223. Also, you could use work sampling or predetermined time standards. Any of those are possible in order to determine how long it takes to make a part. And when we consider how much the employees cost the company, we want to include the actual pay the employee makes, like the dollars per hour or $65,000 a year or whatever it is, plus the taxes. And the taxes include kind of three parts: federal, state, and workers' comp. And then we want to include benefits and or time off. So if there's anything like that, we want to include that into an increased cost for the company over the actual pay. So let's move on in to look at what is happening in these particular three areas. So again, I said there's federal, state, and workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is not really a tax, but it's mandated by the state, so often people think of it as a tax. So the dollars per hour to the cost of the company, which is not equal to the pay of the employees. And you need to remember that because we have to include these other items on top of the pay that you give the employee. So let's look at these in quite a bit of detail. So the federal tax, there's three different kinds of taxes that you pay through the federal government. The first is Social Security tax, the second is Medicare, and the third is federal unemployment tax. For state, you pay state unemployment tax and employee training tax, two more, and this is the state of California. If you are employed in other states, there might be other taxes. So this is for the state of California. And then workers' comp. This is paid to an insurance company. It's like an insurance policy, and it's dependent on the risk of the job. But again, it's mandated by the state, so it's often considered a tax. So the first tax is the Social Security tax, and it is 6.2% on the first $113,700 of income. And actually the 6.2% is paid by the employee and by the employer, so it's actually a joint 12.4% tax. But it's important to know that this limit, so if somebody makes more than $113,700, they pay no more Social Security tax. The next tax is Medicare, and it's 1.45%, paid by both the employee and the employer. So again, it's 2.9%, but there's no limit on that. You just always pay that no matter how much you make. FUTA, which is federal unemployment tax. This actually, unemployment is paid at the state level. You can see that the state also has an unemployment tax. There are some states that are underfunded in their state unemployment system. So this particular state at the federal level compensates those states that are underfunded. And it's actually a pretty small amount, 0.6% on the first $7,000. So like for you, when you're working, you will meet that $7,000 for the year probably around February or so. So after that, the company doesn't have to pay this amount on your wages, but up to that point, it's 0.6%. So looking at the state side, so those are the federals. Now the state unemployment tax. Now unemployment tax is actually an interesting thing. It varies from for each employer, dependent on your history of laying people off. So if you work in a company that's laid people off quite a bit, your rate could go up to 6.2%. If you're on a company that never lays people off, your state unemployment tax can be as low as 1.5%. For new employers, for people who start out without any record, it's 3.4%. So often we use the 3.4% because we don't know, especially in the estimates, what are then those rates. But if you work for a particular employer, you can figure out, ask them what their unemployment rate is. And again, it's limited up to the first $7,000 of wages. So if a person makes more than $7,000, it's only taxed on the $7,000. The next is employee training tax. This is a tax that was set up in order to support retraining of people who've lost their jobs. It's also, again, pretty small. It's like $7 of the maximum per year per employee, 0.1% of the first $7,000. And then the last is workers' compensation. Workers' compensation varies depending on the kind of job you do. So for instance, these are a couple examples. I don't have clerical up there, but clerical is about 3% of wages. Manufacturing is 9%, construction 11%, logging, which is considered one of the most dangerous jobs, is 35%. So you can see it varies on the level of risk of the particular job. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through an example of how to calculate this. If a person makes, if their salary is $65,000, I want to go through and show you how to calculate what are all those values. So the first thing we want to look at is Social Security tax. And if you remember, the Social Security tax, the limit is $113,700. Well, this person is only making $65,000, so they do not match that limit. And it's 6.2%, 6.25% of, no, it's 6.2% of that amount. So that, if you take 6.2% times 65,000, it's 4,030, and that's FICA or Social Security. Medicare is the next tax, and it's 1.45%. So again, we just multiply 65,000 times 1.45, and we get 943. The next one is FUTA. So these are the three federal taxes. Federal unemployment, if you remember, it's 0.6%, but it's only on the first $7,000. So 0.006 times 7,000 is 42. Those are the federal taxes. Now we move on to state taxes. State unemployment, we're going to use 3.4%. And I remember I told you it varies quite a bit, but I'm going to use 3.4%. And most of the things we'll use is 3.4%. Again, it's on the first $7,000. So we need to only take 0.034 times 7,000, which is 238. The next employment training tax, it's 0.1% on the first 7,000, so that ends up being $7. And then workers' comp, I'm going to use 9%, which corresponds to a manufacturing job. Now we would want to know what kind of work the person is doing if they get this, in order to determine what their workers' comp is. But in this case, 9% of 65,000 is 5,850. So that means the total cost to the company is not $65,000, their wage, but $76,100, which actually is a 17% more cost to the company, just for things that are considered taxes. Now, another way of doing this is, and this is probably how you'll do it in your project, because you don't know the particular person who is doing the work, you're just saying a person. And in reality, it could be a different person every 2 weeks. So to be conservative, we would not include any of the limits being met. So just think, well, every 2 weeks we have a different person, so nobody ever meets the $7,000 limit. So in this case, all I'm going to do is add up the percentages. So for Social Security, it's 6.2. For Medicare, it's 1.45. For FUTA, it's 0.06, 3.4, 0.1. And then if it's this manufacturing job, we then will have 20.75% above the pay. Now, if another person is working and maybe they're construction, it would be 11% above the pay. Maybe it's clerical, then it would only be 3% above the pay. So we need to know what is the percentage on the workers' comp. But let's look at this particular, if it is a clerical worker, and if the clerical worker gets $10 an hour, then what we're going to do is add to that $10 an hour 14.75%, which makes the pay rate now, or the cost to the company, be $11.48. So that's how you go through and calculate these pay rate values. This is the method I think you will use in your project, but the other method is more accurate for an individual employee. So there's something else we've actually missed, though. If you remember, we actually need to include benefits or time off in the company. We calculated the taxes, but we need to move to see what the benefits. What kind of benefits do companies have? What if the company provides medical benefits at $8,000 a year, which is actually a pretty standard amount? That's what it costs the company. You need to include that in there. What if the company provides 10 days of a year of time off without pay? So the person's not working, but they're getting paid. That's an additional cost to the company. What if the company provides $10,000 of educational reimbursement? What if the company provides a subsidy for child care center? All of these things need to be included into the cost to the company. Now, in class, we're going to look at how to calculate, how to work through some of these costs. They're not simple, but we will look at that and then come up with a new cost to the company.